And welcome into our roundtable. Bill Priestley here with you. And today we're going to be talking about global threats to the economy. And with that, we have two minds that can really speak to this as well. We have Dr. Marc Scott, who joins us from the University of Arkansas, as well as Dr. Sal Mercogliano, who joins us from Buies Creek in where? Okay, so we have Sal Mercogliano with us here as well. So Sal, let me just start off with you because we've got a lot of stuff here to talk about. First off, we haven't really talked about Ukraine very much in the previous times that we've had a chance to talk about issues relating to maritime. And now let's look at this situation now. Last time you were on, you talked about the fact that it was very hard for basically anybody to move anything in or out of there. What's that situation like now, as it looks like Ukraine mounting counteroffensives may be getting some upper hands in some areas where they had lost?
Sure, Bill. So Ukraine's been able to begin the movement of grain out of their country because of the agreement brokered by the United Nations and Turkey. So we're seeing that flow take place. Now, it's not at the level of pre-war. Pre-war, we were seeing 5 to 6 million tons of grain coming out of Ukraine a month. Right now, we're seeing between 1 and 2 million tons of grain coming out. Now, that deal is in place for 60 days, but we're already hearing that Putin and the Russians are having an issue with this agreement. They're not so much have a problem with Ukraine shipping out. The reciprocal of that agreement was there would be no ties on Russian food, fuel, and fertilizer coming out of the Black Sea. And Russia's feeling like there's too many restrictions that's allowing them not to sell their goods. So the deal could be in jeopardy if it comes up for renewal. Plus, Ukraine is looking to expand the deal, open some new ports that are being opened up by this new counteroffensive.
Dr. Scott, one of the things that you've talked about with me in the past is that as Ukraine was not able to export their grain, that meant that other countries could suit other countries for those exports and imports there as well. How is that working out as far as Ukraine's economy? Have they been able to gain a foothold back with some of their former customers?
Yeah, good to see everyone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, what is occurring currently is that there has been some form of a shift in exports to some other nations, right? The extent and longevity of that shift, whether it is permanent, remains to be seen. There are two things to think about there, I believe. So yes, there's been a shift. For instance, Brazilian exports of grains have significantly increased. Brazilian exports are projected to increase in the double digits over the next 3 to 5 years based on those shifts in alternative perspectives. I think there was a good point just brought up where when we look at the agreement and the sheer volume of grain that is currently throughput based on the agreement, it is falling short of those 3 ports' pre-conflict capacity. And because of that, there is still room in the market for alternative sources. And what is happening indeed is if you look at global container logistics capacity shifts, or shifts of containerized capacity to specific trade lanes, you are seeing movement away from those particular lanes and reinvestment of that capacity in the trans-Pacific and transatlantic lanes.
Gotcha there. Sal, let's shift lanes back to Russia and LNG. And this could be a very serious situation. Obviously, knowing how unbelievably expensive it is to transport LNG in the first place. But with LNG going to Europe, or maybe even not going to Europe, this could be a very significant issue as well.
Yeah, the shutdown of Nord Stream 1, which the Russians have done over a series of days, has been really a shot across the bow to the Europeans of what this winter could look like. Now, we've just saw in both Germany and the Netherlands the establishment of a pair of what's called these floating storage regasification units. We're seeing LNG, liquefied natural gas, coming across the ocean from the United States, from Qatar, from Australia, to Europe. Remember, most of Europe's natural gas came by pipeline, and that was shipped in the gaseous state. But the ship by sea, you have to cool it. You have to bring it down to 260 degrees below Fahrenheit, a typical day in Chicago in the wintertime. You got to get it that low. And when you get it that low, then you have to rewarm it to be able to feed it into the pipeline. So you've got constraints in being able to offload this type of cargo in Europe. You've got the additional cost of transportation. You've got the additional cost of regasification. And then you have storage capacity issues too, because with the pipelines, you didn't need as much storage capacity, but now you do. And Europe really is teetering on a winter where they may not have enough fuel coming in to keep themselves warm.
Yeah, and just staying on that point there, Dr. Scott, we've been running a lot more stories recently on climate issues and especially heat waves, and Europe right now undergoing some of undergoing some of those stresses right there. Water levels dropping. What is this going to do to the freight markets in Europe? Obviously, rates have already been climbing high. Fuel is through the roof. As Sal just mentioned, things could be very bad for them in the winter.
Yeah, I think we're positioned to see quite a few issues freight-wise across Europe. I think if I could step back a second and speak to one of Sal's points, which is one of the things that is a complementary or supporting point to what he's articulating, is that there is about to be, so we've had the LNG supply chains that are pipeline driven. What we are seeing with the shutdown or the reduction, a dramatic reduction from Nord Stream distribution, is the emergence of the importance of the location and positioning of tank containers, LNG containers across the globe. When you look at the emergence of new LNG export titans, for want of a better word, we see that Qatar, the United States, Indonesia, Nigeria, we look at the repositioning of these containers across the globe and look at what is that. I think it's going to be a dramatic impact and tightening of capacity in that space because of the emergence of these new players and Russia's withdrawal. What that does mean is that there is going to be competing. We're already seeing a lot of competition for capacity and a lot of competition, and that competition is driving a dramatic increase in rates. Now, those rates are going to be, I believe they're going to be tiered, and I believe they're going to differ across subsector and across particular categories. I believe that food, industrial processes, industrial goods, and the transport of industrial goods and food supplies in Europe are going to significantly be impacted, and rates are going to increase all the way through the balance of the year.
Now, let me switch gears just a little bit and just kind of take a 30,000-foot view of the entire issue here. When you look at all of these issues, and maybe even some that we haven't had a chance to talk about even in recent history, is there anything right now that jumps out at you as what maybe is the major threat that we're not talking about right now?
Well, I mean, we keep talking about, the reduction in freight rates and the reduction in containers moving around. But what we keep forgetting, I think, is how little disruptions have caused multiple problems over the entire supply chain. And when you look at the myriad of issues that we see going on, labor strikes in Germany, in Great Britain, potential issues of fuel and inflation coming out of Russian reduction of gas to Europe, a potential breakdown of the Ukrainian-Russian grain deal here, all of these are continuing to throw rocks into the pond and keeping those waves of uncertainty in ocean shipping afloat. I think it's good to have a very positive image. We're coming down from, the worst part of the supply chain crisis. But, we're still coming down the backside of Mount Everest, and we're still pretty high on freight rates, and we still have a lot of issues that can cause disruptions in the supply chain right now. So I think it's really important to stay informed and aware because, again, we didn't see where the last disruptions came from. And what the next one looming on the horizon is, we don't know. But to be prepared for it is to be informed.
Yeah, exactly. And you're mentioning strikes. Of course, we're several days away from the 16th, which could mean possibly a rail strike in this country. Dr. Scott, same question. What's the big problem out there that we're not talking about?
I think we are talking about it to some extent, but what is at the forefront of my mind is what is happening with container schedule delays globally as a result of the conflict, as a result of the confluence of the conflicts in Ukraine and Russia, the pandemic. When we look globally, particularly in that trans-Pacific and transatlantic trade lane, container schedule delay times have increased by 6 times their pre-pandemic, pre-conflict levels. Globally, they've doubled. So what we're seeing is as volumes shift across the globe and capacity concentrates to where there's opportunity, container schedule delay times continue to increase. At the same time, what is happening simultaneously is countries, as a result of the conflict and the extent to which the Ukraine and Russia were exporters of key commodities and energy, as companies and countries more specifically allocate and find new sources, it is changing the transit time lengths and cost of transport globally. So yes, there are alternative sources being found. To the extent that those sources have capacity to replace what the Ukraine and Russia has been able to export, I don't think that capacity is in the market necessarily, but there are these alternative sources, but it is dramatically changing supply chain design. And transit times are increasing. As a result of transit times increasing, costs are increasing. And there are projections that consumers will see that increase in the price of goods. That's the top of my mind.
Well, gentlemen, we live in some very interesting times with some very interesting problems to solve. Thank you so much for joining us today, and obviously we'll keep a close eye on a lot of these things.
Thank you. Good to see everyone. Have an awesome day.
All right, thank you. All right, we will continue our show with Kaylee Nix as we have weather coming up next.